All right, so here I am in my Alvin O. Kuhn Library and Gallery website, library.umbc.edu. And if you've never been to this website before, I am stunned and shocked that you've made it this far in your academic career without visiting the library website. I won't judge, though. That's not the purpose of this illustration. We're here to go over to the tab here called Databases to find a database called JSTOR, which is very relevant to our literature search task. And so if we go into this box, click on the database box and type in JSTOR, we can click search here and you'll see that it will pop open a new tab which will allow us to search for a thing called JSTOR. Don't worry about this open community collections. We want JSTOR and JSTOR itself. If we click on this, it will open up yet another tab, and now we'll be in the JSTOR archive. The JSTOR archive is really great because it allows us to narrow our results to a very specific set of sources, that being articles. And by articles, we're referring in JSTOR principally to peer-reviewed published research that's been vetted by this process I just described and published in academic journals, and books, which have been published generally by academic presses and have also gone through a rigorous peer review process. Now, let's imagine that I'm interested in negative political advertising and perhaps its effects on voter turnout. So my research topic would be essentially what effects does negative political advertising have? Maybe I could also flip that around and say I'm interested in voter turnout. What explains variation in voter turnout could be a good way to phrase my research topic. But my research question at the end of the day is, does exposure to negative political advertising cause variation in voter turnout? And so to find literature on that nexus, right, I could first of all just look at voter turnout and maybe American elections. I could be interested in American elections. All right, you can just put these keywords in here, and you'll see that it actually fills in Booleans. You can say and or. I'm going to obviously use and generally. In all fields, obviously we don't want voter turnout to be the author. I generally just leave this as all fields. We can submit this as an advanced search, and we'll see that we'll start to bring up some really relevant stuff from some good political science journals. And so we'll see soon that some of these journal sources are really core in American politics. For example, the American Political Science Review is essentially the flagship journal of political science, and it's joined essentially by these days it's co-flagship American Journal of Political Science, or the AJPS. We've already got a couple of great articles here from a couple decades ago that would be really helpful for our discussion of voter turnout. So this might be a good way to begin thinking about what explains voter turnout. So again, I'd go through here and I'd start looking at some of the various things, because in my literature review, I want to make sure that the audience knows there's a wide variety of things that have an influence on voter turnout. This Richard Timpone piece could be really helpful. There's a lot going on here, right? Voter ID laws, registration. Marjorie Hershey, actually, this is a scholar who I've had the distinct pleasure of getting to work with in my career. Other people, John Matsusaka, other people who've done a lot of work on explaining this. I mean, this is a great summary of this topic, isn't it? Voter turnout, how much can we explain? And I'm sure that in this Matsusaka and Palda piece in the journal Public Choice, which is a famous journal, we'll be able to see a lot of discussion of these various things. However, already we're getting closer to our research question, because here's Goldstein and Friedman in the Journal of Politics, which is another very important journal, writing a piece about campaign advertising and voter turnout. And so already this is a pretty useful paper for our study. And all I've done is I've typed in voter turnout and American. And in the first page of, let's see how many sources there are that look at this, 544 pages of sources. So we've got a lot of content. But already we've got at least one that is quite relevant, quite germane to our topic. And so I think, many of these we're going to want to glance at and read and think about including in our literature review. But this one seems like it's definitely belonging in the literature review. We can click on this, we can take a look at it, see what it has to say. And in fact, once you click on this, you can pop it out and you'll actually see the PDF, which you can then download and save on your computer for later. You can also cite the item by clicking on Cite, and you'll be able to load a very nice APA or Chicago citation. Some of this stuff, like the access date, you aren't going to need to include in a standard citation, so this much will probably be okay in the Chicago style, but it nevertheless provides us a nice a nice beginning for this particular source. So that's nice, but we could also refine our search to be not just about voter turnout. We might say we want to look at voter turnout and negative campaign advertising. If I search that way for books and articles, we might see some stuff that's a little bit more specific. And so this is where we want to get into the real details here. Negative campaign advertising, demobilizer or mobilizer. This seems like a really, really useful source here, right? 1999. You might also, nevertheless, think about wanting to get the most recent literature as well, not just this literature from the 90s. And so you can also apply filters here. So you can say, give me everything from 2010 to 2021. And you should be able to find stuff that's a little bit, more relevant to this decade. So, or at least the past decade. Election laws, mobilization, turnout. Again, this is not going to always be super germane. You're going to have to read these abstracts and see which ones fit the best for your study. But for example, here's Yana Krupnikov. This is actually another scholar I've had the opportunity to work closely with in the past. Dr. Krupnikov wrote a paper in 2011 called "When Does Negativity Demobilize?" You better be willing to bet I want to put this in my literature review. This seems very, very directly related to my research question. And so you can see from this exercise that I've got both some literature that's more broadly seeking to explain what affects voter turnout, and then later in the literature review, I'm including sources that I think are most closely related to my research question. I'm going to also show you a thing called Google Scholar. And you can see here I'm logged in, so I've got recommendations here because I use Google Scholar all the time. Here's my Google Scholar profile, for example, including some of the research that I've published in the past. It's a nice way for you to have scholars be able to view your work easily. But I could, for example, search negative political advertising. I've already typed in this search because I was looking for a topic to use here. And in fact, I wanted to look at this Krupnikov piece as a specific springboard for this research topic. But I could also type in negative political advertising voter turnout into this search bar, and you'll find a whole bunch of stuff through Google Scholar. However, there is a catch, and this is the thing that I want you to be very careful about. That is the fact that not everything in this Google Scholar list, even though this is a very powerful search engine and it results in very useful stuff, and you can also see the citation counts, so you can figure out how often people have looked at this. It's got a very nice interface. Not everything in this Google Scholar site is peer-reviewed. So you absolutely have to be on your guard to make sure that the journal in which this has been published is a vetted peer-reviewed journal. Now, the way that we do this, how do we actually figure out if this is in fact peer-reviewed? Well, a good way to do this is to take the journal title. Let's figure out, I don't know, here's this PDF that I can access. I've got this thing I can click on. Let's copy this. Let's copy this text of the journal title itself. Or you can see, for example, this one, Niven's piece in Political Research Quarterly. Is this a cited? Is this a peer-reviewed journal? Well, I can copy that. I can open up a new tab. I can paste that in there, and lo and behold, I can pull up the website for Political Research Quarterly. Often, even Google provides me with this little pull-out tab here that gives a thing called an impact factor. And so if we can see the impact factor from this, or we can also go to the website and we can click on this and see journal info, right? Journal description. We'll be able to see Political Research Quarterly is a peer-reviewed journal that publishes original research on all aspects of politics. It looks like this is a peer-reviewed source, which means that we are able to go back and include this PRQ, Political Research Quarterly, paper in our literature review. Now, if we were to go down here and we were to look at a couple of, these are all peer-reviewed, but if we were to go to like page 10 of this, or further, I'm not sure, there might be a few of these that are not peer-reviewed. So actually, another thing I could do is I could say, give me only stuff since 2021, right? Like this, OSF.io. Like, what is this? The driving factor for stability of voter turnout. Now, is OSF.io a journal? Well, I don't know. I don't know about journals yet, right? Maybe I'll just Google this. What is OSF.io? Well, I open this up. It turns out that this is not a peer-reviewed journal. This is actually a preprint repository. OSF.io is a way for you to publish academic pre-publication reports. And so we know that this is actually not a peer-reviewed journal simply because we've looked for this thing called OSF and we've discovered that it's not a journal. This, for example, also, Nurturing Democracy. This is georgiasouthern.edu. Oh, this looks like it could be useful, right? Well, this is something that's from the Georgia Southern Digital Commons. And so that's also probably a preprint repository, meaning this has not yet made it through the peer review process. It's being hosted by a university's preprint repository. And so here we can see, right? What is this? I mean, like, look at actually what this is an honors thesis. So if you look at this recommended citation, what's the journal title here? Well, clearly, University Honors Program Theses is not a journal. And it even says this thesis has brought to you for free and open access. That's not going to cut it, right? That's not a tier 1 source. So we've got to close this down, and we've got to go back to Google Scholar, and we've got to try again. So again, just to recap, JSTOR is a very helpful search engine because generally it's going to avoid, with the exception of research reports, which you have to watch out for, it's generally going to avoid throwing you sources that are non-peer reviewed. Whereas Google Scholar is a very powerful and flexible search engine which has a lot of nice information about these papers. But you run the risk always of encountering papers that have not yet been peer reviewed, that are in preprint repositories, or are simply non-peer reviewed technical reports altogether. So be very careful, tread carefully when you're doing this. And the last thing I'd say is if you have a question about whether or not a source is peer reviewed, send me a link in an email and just say, Professor Anson, is this peer reviewed? And I'll be able to send you a response. I will say, yes, this is great. This is a great journal. Or I will say, no, you don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. This has not been peer reviewed, and I don't even know where this is being hosted online. It is not vetted by the scholarly community. So good luck with your research, with your search. And certainly, again, this is a process with a lot of highs and lows, and it's going to require a lot of diligence too. You're going to have to read these things carefully, especially these abstracts at the beginning of each paper to determine whether or not it's appropriate for your literature review. So good luck, and as always, I'm available to answer any questions you might have.